And interestingly enough, 70% of the population lives within 62 miles of the southern border. So there's not many people in the rest of Canada at all. It is the world's second largest country. It is the world's longest binational border. So that whole border between the United States and Canada is huge. The largest cities are Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. We're not talking about any of those today. And it wasn't until 1982 that Canada severed all its connections with Great Britain, even though the Queen still presides over the Commonwealth. And it is officially bilingual, French and English. Here's the Queen. It ranks very high among these measures of government transparency, civil rights, quality of life, economics, and education. And it's very startling to me when I go there, Toronto, especially Vancouver, to see how ethnically and culturally diverse it is. It's in Toronto, whites are the minority, and that's probably true in Vancouver. A little less true, I think, in Quebec, but it's very interesting. They welcome all immigrants. Obviously, it's a very sparsely populated country. They're very happy to have immigration, and they have it from everywhere. You meet people from everywhere. It's the 10th largest economy in the world, and it has indigenous people, the Inuit, the First Nations, and this other small tribe, the Metis. So it's a very interesting country, very different from ours, really. These are founding principles of the Canadian government: a full democracy, a tradition of liberalism, an egalitarian, moderate political ideology, emphasis on social justice, peace, order, and good government, an implied Bill of Rights, and universal health care. So some people find Canada dull. It may be a little bit dull, I don't know. Maybe because they're not having to struggle so much for the sort of basics of democracy that we do sometimes. This is our route. Sorry, somebody gave me a pointer here and I can't find it. So we start in Quebec City, and we have a few days there. So you'll see a lot of Quebec City, which is very pretty and nice to see, and around Quebec City. And then we went to Saguenay, and then Charlottetown, Sydney, and I don't have clear pictures of all these places. Halifax I do. Bar Harbor, so now we're in the United States, Bar Harbor, Maine, Boston, and then New York. So it was quite an interesting trip and a good time for it in September. One of the purposes of going was to see the leaves turning. We didn't. It was too early and most of the trees were green, as you'll see. So Canada has 10 provinces and 3 territories. Quebec has a population of 540,000, that's all. So it's much smaller than San Diego. It is the second largest city in Quebec, Montreal being the largest, and the 11th largest Canadian capital city of the province of Quebec. And that's the flag you can see in the distance. It has French fleur-de-lis, and of course it is primarily French-speaking. So we are going to these places I just said: Quebec, Saguenay, Charlottetown, Halifax, Bar Harbor, Boston, and New York City. And here we are in Quebec. So there is a major highway connecting Quebec and Montreal, and Quebec is along the St. Lawrence River where our cruise ship went. And Quebec started in 1608, and you'll see a lot of the very old buildings still extant. But it was very cheerful. The flowers were blooming when we were there. There was outdoor dining, although it got cold and rainy some of the time. You can see from the stonework here that this is a very old building. But they know how to live, and they welcome tourists. There's a lot of tourists there. This is a museum about the Battle of the Plain of Abraham, named after, not Abraham from the Bible, but a guy named Abraham who happened to own that farmland that they were battling on. It was a battle between the French and the British. The British won, but still there's a predominant influence of the French in Quebec. Anybody know what that is?
Hotel.
What? Chateau Frontenac, yeah. So we stayed there. This is a little snow around it that we did not have snow, but it's an old picture, I mean a different picture. There's a lot of color there. The old wall, you can see how old that is, probably dating from 1600. We ate in some of these restaurants, very nice, very French food. There's the Plains of Abraham. The battle was 1759. This is a different season. Fortunately, we were not in it. But they get very severe winters. But they have fun. Here's another picture of the Chateau Frontenac, now owned by the Fairmont. And it's up on a hill, it makes it stand out more. This is not my picture because if I had taken it, the leaves would still be green. So the hotel takes its name from Louis de Bade, Comte de Frontenac. A key figure in the New France history. Frontenac was the governor of the colony from 1672 to 1682, and again until 1698. He defended the colony against the British and Iroquois attacks. This is the world's most photographed hotel. You can see why. Lapin sauté, what does that mean?
Rabbit.
Sautéed rabbit, yeah. There's a lot of museums. We didn't go in any, but they're very interesting. This is, most of this architecture that you've already seen is pretty old and sort of continental. But here is a very modern museum, the Museum of Civilization, that from all accounts is really wonderful and completely modern architecture. Not sure where that is. Not sure what this Chinese guy was doing there, but he's entitled. Of course, Vancouver is the place for a heavy concentration of Chinese people. You can see how old it is. It looks as though somebody's moving into that castle, but I don't know. Oh, this castle. Yeah. How would you like to move in there? I guess it would be very hard to heat it in the wintertime.
Yeah.
This is a menu of a place. I think our first meal was here. No. So I wanted to call attention to the item on the menu that is poutine. Anybody know what poutine is? Okay. You will leave here knowing what poutine is. There it is. And it's deep fried fries, poutine gravy, and white cheddar cheese curds all tossed together. At one time, when I was head of the Hemlock Society nationally, I was invited to debate in Canada in 6 universities with the Campus Crusade for Christ, and we all drove together. And they stopped at McDonald's somewhere, I can't remember where, and we got poutine. That was my initiation of poutine. But I'm going to tell you more about it than you ever want to know. This is what Wikipedia says, so that makes it authoritative. For the Acadian dish of boiled potato dumplings, see poutine râpé. For the Russian politicians, see Vladimir Putin. Poutine is a dish that includes French fries and cheese curds topped with a brown gravy, and there's many, many recipes for how to make the gravy and how to make which kind of cheese to use. It originated in Quebec and emerged in the 1950s and has long been associated with Quebec cuisine, which is sort of a shame because Quebec cuisine is really very fine cuisine. For many years it was perceived negatively and mocked. Can't imagine why. And even used by some to stigmatize Quebec society. Poutine later became celebrated as a symbol of Quebecois cultural pride. Its rise in prominence led to its popularity outside the province, especially in Ontario, the Maritimes, and in the northeastern United States. Annual poutine celebrations occur in Montreal, Quebec City, and Drummondville, as well as Toronto, etc. Today it is often identified as a quintessential Canadian food. It has been called Canada's national dish, though some believe this labeling represents a misappropriation of Quebecois culture. It's really a Quebec dish, not a Canadian dish. Freshness and juiciness of the curds is essential. And more I want to tell you about. Poutineries frequently offer limited time promotional specials such as a Thanksgiving poutine with turkey, stuffing, and cranberry sauce. It's too bad we're missing that. In anticipation of the legalization of cannabis in Canada, Montreal's La Grasse Dure served up pot poutine with a gravy that included hemp protein, hemp seeds, and hemp oil, offered with a joint-like roll of turkey and mushrooms and arugula. And here's places where you can get, in San Diego, if you Google poutine, Yelp has several places where you can get poutine dishes. Here's one that serves Dungeness crab poutine fries, etc. And you will not want for poutine in San Diego because there's at least 5 places that are mentioned on the internet. So now you know about poutine. I'm not sure of this last one, whether this is in San Diego, but they use white cheddar curds, melt between the fries and mix with the gravy. And then they have bacon lardons that will give you the taste of salt pork in the poutine. So there you are. Don't tell me you haven't learned anything tonight. This is the Museum of the Battle of the Plain of Abraham. And this is right in front of our hotel. Of course, the Chateau Frontenac has a prominent place in Quebec City. And then on the other side of this is the St. Lawrence River, which is where our cruise was. They take a lot of pride in this little city. I'm not sure where this fits in. I think they played on the ship. I can hardly remember, but they're very nice Canadian young women. Here's an interesting contrast in the styles of architecture.
Those people we heard that the joke, what's the difference between a fiddle and a violin?
No, I'm coming to that.
Oh, you are, okay.
I don't know where this totem pole came from. I think it's a First Nation piece of art. And I don't remember seeing it in Quebec, but it was, I have a slide of it, so there it is. Very nice, I think. A characteristic of the architecture of Quebec, which is not very nice, is all these outdoor stairs. You see them on this apartment building, and you see them more decorated going up to a house. Here's a hospital, Hotel Dieu. And the British haven't left. The British presence is very well known. McGill University is in Quebec, in Montreal. And of course, the Queen's picture is on the currency. This is not the Queen. I'm not sure what Scientology is doing there. Up to no good, I think. So, no. This is that museum again. This is Ken Watson, I think. And we are eating at the Chateau Frontenac, our big treat. It was very pleasant. Not wonderful, but it was pleasant. This is their wine cellar. So it's hardly a cellar. And this is, but it's refrigerated and, or cooled anyway. And the waiters have to go up here to get their wines. Quite a variety of wines here. And this is another picture of it.
Doesn't have the glass of that Las Vegas.
And a little stuffed animal here, a moose. I think I had moose for dinner.
Oh, that wasn't moose. That was a reindeer.
There's several streets that are very charming, sort of below ground to get there. We took a cable car to get there. And they have all kinds of souvenirs here. There's the St. Lawrence with all its commercial traffic. We didn't see this. You can take an excursion boat on the St. Lawrence Seaway. There are a lot of parts in Quebec City, residential, that look like a lot of fun. There's the outside stairway again. There's some very old buildings. It could be Paris. It's very continental looking architecture, some of it. A lot of Chinese tourists are there. This cute picture. This is Anita and Ron. Ron is Ken's son. Anita is his wife. Quite an interesting building though in the background. Looks like Rapunzel should be coming out of there. And this man is Samuel Champlain, who founded Canada, I guess. We took this tour bus. Interesting mailbox. I'm trying to remember, this was, which I thought was a dish of hors d'oeuvres, which it isn't actually. It's a dish of hard candies you take on the way out. This is a nice little Italian restaurant that we found.
It's going never come home, God. Kiss me, my God. Be mine. Tomorrow will be rain. It's now or never.
This is the history of the Chateau Frontenac. This guy on the left is one of the doormen. He's all dressed up like a French nobleman. And there is a French nobleman, not dressed up like a doorman, but. So some of the time it was cold and rainy. And I had to go in a department store there and buy a jacket, which was an interesting experience. And in the jacket I have with me, I got on the ship that says Canada and New England on the back. Salespeople were very nice. I don't think I'd want to live there during this time of the year. At some point we got left off in our taxi at this Congress Center, which had very interesting sculpture, like that. What that's supposed to represent, I'm not sure. Interesting, isn't it? There's the British flag, the Canadian flag, and the Quebec flag coexisting. I'm not sure what building that is. It's beautiful. One of the small streets that's quite charming. It looks like this is wine growing country in the outskirts of Quebec. There is some agricultural land, which of course many months of the year cannot be used. Here's a wonderful chocolaterie. Sorry. Yum. This is, we stopped at a place, and I really don't remember the name of it, but it had this huge waterfall, and you could take this cable car up to the top to get a better view of it. In the outskirts is Saint-Anne-de-Beaupré. Anybody have ever been to Saint-Anne-de-Beaupré? It's a good place to take your walker because you could leave your walker there because people get cured of all the ailments that they have. There it is. It's really a magnificent cathedral. These copper doors are beautiful, and we went to a shop that makes these doors, that made these doors, that makes lots of things in copper. I think we have some pictures of them. But there's the cathedral. It's really magnificent cathedral. I was fascinated with these wooden carvings on the side of each pew. Each one is different. Mouse, ducks, snake, and more copper carvings. A train goes right in front of the cathedral, I guess, to take pilgrims. I think it's fairly easy to get to from Quebec or Montreal. There's more art in the cathedral. And there's the crutches. I don't see any walkers there, but I don't see why not.
Well, my walker ran a little better.
So there was a little bit of color in some of the trees. This is a picture I took from the bus, as you can see. This is Ken's other son, Mark, and his wife, Carol. It was fun to go with these young folks. The next stop was actually Saguenay, but these are some pictures from Charlottetown, which is the capital of Prince Edward Island, which is one of the 3 territories, I think. Sorry not to know more about this. This is our ship, I think. Somebody's ship. So nice to be there in the summer when the flowers are blooming. Everything is so nice. He inserted himself here. I don't know anything about him. We did not go to Bar Harbor next, but it just happened to sneak in here. So Acadia National Park, yeah, is a beautiful park, all wooded and planted. Lovely place to walk. And warmer, of course, than it was in Quebec. Plenty of color here. Thanks for coming, thanks for choosing Quebec. Yes, we left Quebec already, but we may come back. And this is the entrance to the ship. Saguenay actually was the next stop after Quebec, which is actually part of Quebec. We didn't meet him. They have a very interesting museum there because there's something about their waterway that is a deep fjord. And this museum is all about how that got there, what it is, and everything else. It's quite an elaborate science museum and aquarium. Such things are here. I do know how he got there. And across the street is this statue. And this is their what?
Hockey time.
Hockey team, thank you. And I forgot what this is. Interesting building, whatever it is. A lot of very pretty churches, as there are in New England. This is a farm that we stopped at, which raises, I'm pretty sure, Angora goats, but some kind of interesting fur. There they are. Friendly goats. But their wool is something special. And their horns are pretty special too. I think they get sheared every 3 months or something like that. And some of these guys definitely are ready for their results. They're friendly. I said they were goats, and now I'm thinking that they're sheep. More. This is some of the products they have in the store. The wool is very soft, so all of these things are beautiful things that they make. And they have their own spinning wheel. They make their own yarn, dye their own yarn. He intruded himself in my slideshow. This is very interesting. We made a special trip to this house, which we walked through, and actually you can't really take pictures of the house behind it, which belonged to an artist. And this artist was a compulsive painter, and he painted every inch of the house, inside and outside, with his very imaginative paintings. I got a little refrigerator magnet of it, and it looks something like this. It's quite amazing. There are several in the world, several people I've come across who have been compelled to paint everything they touch. And this guy was very talented. Beautiful stuff, I think. There's a paper mill right near there. This is a typical house. and a hockey rink. There's our ship. Not crazy about this ship, I have to say. I don't like ships this big. And you can see how it dwarfs this little place that we stopped at, Saguenay. I think it's sort of obscene myself, but I don't have many pictures of the ship, just a few. That's our route again. I'm not complaining about the food, it was very good, as you can see from the dessert. This is... Some of you were here when I showed the cruise ship that I took from St. Petersburg to Moscow with 100 passengers, with nothing like this going on there. Russian food, Russian entertainment, Russian lessons, music lessons, language lessons, everything else. This kind of ship absolutely turns me off, and I would not take a Princess line again. I mean, it's interesting, you go out in these small New England towns and Canadian towns, and things are very peaceful and quiet and, in a sense, primitive. And then you go on a ship like this, not my cup of tea. But the stops were good. This is... I can't remember whether that's Charlottetown or another place. But a lot of Irish and Scotch people settled here. That's sort of like Irish dancing that you just saw. Charlottetown, okay. Classes like that here, don't you think? Yeah. I can't remember what the context was, but I thought it was really pretty. Some homes. In all the cases, we found guides or took taxi rides or something to see the rest of the islands. They were all very well cared for, nicely planted, nice little places. More steps. Okay, Bridget. They take great pride in this dancing and fiddling too. Okay, Ken wants you to know that they told us the difference between a fiddle and a violin. Anybody know? You can spill beer on your fiddle. We didn't go on this tour, so I don't know what the connection is between Anne of Green Gables and Charlottetown.
That's
Except
where
that-
her home was,
What?
and the author lived there.
Oh, the author lived there.
Mm.
That makes sense. Thank you. Oops, this is St. Anne de Beauvoir, wrong place. For some reason, these animals were at the dock when we got off. Sweet little fellows. They could be, yeah, llamas, yeah. So Cape Breton, because there's such big fiddlers there, has erected a huge fiddle at the dock. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Pretty good, huh? Didn't mean to give the fiddler short shrift. Oops, I guess I did. It's so much nicer than the music on the ship. It's really lovely and it seems very authentic. Bagpipers met us in Halifax, which has a strong Scottish ancestry. Some people hate that sound. I love it. So this was our guide in Halifax. We got to be good friends. He always wore his kilt, of course. How many of you been to Halifax? Seems like a lovely place. English speaking primarily. Port on the Atlantic Ocean, and is the provincial capital of Nova Scotia. It has a lot of business going on there, and because of its maritime location, I think. And it's dominated by the hilltop citadel, a star-shaped fort, completed in the 1850s. Waterfront warehouses known as the historic properties recall Halifax's days a trading hub for privateers. The weather right now is 45 degrees, not then. It was quite pleasant when we were there. And there's about 430,000 people living there. And they do speak primarily English, except in Cape Breton, which they speak French. And they have a very nice maritime museum there. But we elected this tour, which had to do with the Titanic cemetery. And I didn't know, and many people don't know, that, oh, let me read it to you. Here in Halifax lie the remains of 150 victims of one of history's most tragic maritime disasters. Just before midnight on April 14, 1912, the White Star liner RMS Titanic struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic. The majestic ship sank in less than 3 hours, with the loss of close to 1,500 lives. In the aftermath of the sinking, White Star chartered 3 ships from Halifax and 1 from St. John's to search for the dead. Of the 328 recovered, many were buried at sea. The remaining bodies were returned to Halifax, where some were claimed by their families and the rest interred at the Fairfax, Fairview Lawn, Mount Olivet, and Baron de Hirsch cemeteries. And I went down there to see what it was. And this is what it looks like. Pretty sight. This is our guide, who I have to say helped me back up because it was a long trek.
There were 64 life rafts on board, but they took them all off but 16. And they did that, of course, because it was the unsinkable ship, and also they wanted more room on deck for the first class passengers to be able to meander freely around the deck. Of the 2,000 and close to 2,300 that were on the Titanic, only 735 were rescued. And not one of those 16 life rafts was filled. And the reason for that is because they didn't do any life raft drills, they didn't do any fire drills, because they didn't think anything like that could possibly happen. So they really challenged Mother Nature on that aspect. And of course now, rules and regulations for all passengers.
Interesting, isn't it? I mean, I didn't know anything about this. So these are some of the graves. Here's a 19-year-old one in the front. There's a little kid around there, 24-year-old one over there. This person stayed at his post of duty, seeking to save others, regardless of his own life, and he went down with the ship.
Identification. At the end of the day, no one claimed this little boy's body, so the men of the Mackie Bennett did something quite amazing. You can imagine they did not make much money, but they adopted this little boy as their own. They built a tiny coffin, and on the coffin they put a plaque which read, "Our Babe," and they actually paid for this larger headstone, and they laid him to rest here. Thousands of Haligonians came to that funeral service, and close to 100 years went by, and this child was known as the unknown child. Down at the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic, they have his little shoes on display down there. But in 1995, there was a DNA match. And we now know that this little boy's name is Sidney Leslie Goodwin.
Oh, I'm sorry. Anyway, he goes on. Quite an interesting story that they found out who he was through DNA. Quite a big place. There's also a Jewish part of the cemetery where some of the Jewish Titanic passengers were buried, and other Jewish people. Here's a burial taking place now. Rabbi. Up on top of the hill, you see this wonderful view of Halifax, this beautiful, tall ship there.
All nature seemed inclined for a rest, but still there was no rest for me. Farewell to Nova Scotia, the sea-bound coast. Let your mountains dark and dreary be. For when I'm far away on the briny ocean tossed, will you ever heave a sigh and a wish for me? Will you ever heave a sigh and a wish for me? God bless, folks.
So Halifax is the capital of the province of Nova Scotia. And it occurred to me when I got back from the cemetery that I knew a song about the Titanic. Maybe some of you know this. Oh, it was sad, oh, it was sad, it was sad when the great ship went down to the bottom of the husbands and wives, little children lost their lives. It was sad when the great ship went down. Anybody know that song? I don't know why I know it, but the guide knew it, of course. He grew up there. That was fun to sing that. Here's a library in Halifax. Unusual. This was our guide somewhere, not in Halifax actually, and he had this shirt that said Cindy's Sweet Cannabis. So I was sort of anxious to find out where Cindy's place was. He said there was no such place. There's our ship with the life rafts in tow. And we could watch movies on the deck. This was Rocket Man playing. I think we're next in Bar Harbor. Anyway, we got to Bar Harbor and we went to this very nice hotel where this guy was teaching us all about lobsters. Sex life of lobsters, how they are raised, everything about lobsters.
They don't smell smoke or perfume like humans do. Every creature that lives in the ocean does give off a scent to chemicals, different amino acids, different proteins. By the scent, they'll be able to determine if you're dealing with a prey, predator, or something you're interested in. They are classified as decapods, for some weird reason. Marine biologists consider the claws as the first pair. Their claws are different, and a lot of neighbors come from paying attention to this thing, which is something that they'll notice. One claw, a sharp teeth, one claw,
I bet you've never seen the Lobster Professor before.
some of you are videotaping. This is not a good idea if it gets on the internet.
He's not audible, I'm sorry. So then we went to Acadia National Park, which was beautiful up there. And some colors were coming out, as you can see. But then we headed toward the pier where the lobster roll sandwich was promised. We went to this place that our guide recommended, which also had wonderful ice cream, as you can see. And there's our lobster roll, finally, which was worth the wait. Anyway, this is Bar Harbor. We went to Boston, which was a longer trip and quite exhausting, actually. Did a lot of climbing around in Boston, and then went to Harvard and Cambridge for old time's sake. It was nice for me. So we went to Old North Church, which means climbing up the top of the hill, Beacon Hill, Paul Revere. This is all part of the Freedom Trail. Have you all been in the Freedom Trail? There's a classic Beacon Hill house with those round windows and this beautiful new bridge. I can't think of the name. It was named after one of their politicians, I believe. Beautiful bridge. More lobster. This is an old sign from Charlottetown. Crossing international borders with cannabis is illegal. I'm not sure because cannabis is legal now in Canada. Anyway, so that brings us to New York City. We arrived for some reason in Brooklyn. And we stayed at the Yotel, which is an interesting modern hotel near Times Square. And this is their 4th floor restaurant. So when you're out there, you're right in the midst of all the skyscrapers. We took a harbor cruise. And really, New York's architecture has to be seen like every couple of years just to catch up with the new ideas. Like this one. And this one. This was the 9/11 museum. Last time I had been there, it was not at all completed, and you could hardly even get in to look at what they were doing. But now it's finished. These are the names of the people who died there. The museum has a lot of memorabilia from 9/11, which I won't go into detail, but I do have pictures of it. So we saw 3 shows. I saw 3 shows. The first one we saw was beautiful, about Carole King's life. We got a chance to act a little bit. It's my Broadway debut. And there we are taking a cab, open cab, through Times Square, like real tourists. This is like the jacket I've been wearing. There's our route again, and the Statue of Liberty, which was very nice to see that it hasn't been sold yet to Russia. But, so that's it. So, thank you. That's just the highlights, but of course it took 12 days. Still awake. Some of you are.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.